going to begin by making a few brief remarks, and then I'd be happy to take your questions. I want to take this opportunity to first acknowledge that yesterday's report of the Integrity Commissioner pointed to very clear flaws to the process that led to the removal of the lands being removed from the Greenbelt. I accept that I ought to have had greater oversight over my former Chief of Staff and over the process. And to Ontarians, I want to say very sincerely that I apologize that I did not. I'm committed to making sure that the flaws of the kind outlined in the report by Justice Wake do not happen again. That's why we've worked very closely and transparently with the Integrity Commissioner's Office, which he acknowledged yesterday in his report. And that's why, as a government, we're already taking steps to improve the decision-making process moving forward. As the Integrity Commissioner also noted, our government's motivation has always been to build homes, including those that came about as a result of the changes we made to the Greenbelt. Our government recognizes that we have a generational housing supply problem. We have a crisis of affordability in our province. We remain committed, and I remain committed to work with Premier Ford on the task that he's given me, and that's to get homes built to tackle that housing supply crisis. We're going to keep moving forward with our goal of getting at least 1.5 million homes built by 2031, but I recognize that the work has to be done in a manner that builds trust with Ontarians, in addition to the fact that we need to build those homes for people who need them and deserve them. As Minister, that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm pleased to answer questions from you at this time. Yes.
You are a career politician. You've been at this for what, 40 years? You've always had a good reputation. People around here, even opposition critics, say you're a decent man and a good politician. How is it possible you failed at this key role, at this pivotal moment for your government on such a toxic, controversial file? How is it that you failed with all your years of experience?
I completely accept the responsibility that I was overly reliant on my chief and my staff. That I regret that I didn't provide the sufficient oversight. I'm very mindful of Commissioner Wake's recommendations, and I know as a government we want to instill that trust back into Ontarians. But I accept.
Why don't you resign today, Minister?
I'm here to accept responsibility, Richard, for the lack of oversight I had in the process. I want to make it very clear to Ontarians that I'm sorry that we didn't do a better job, and that I personally didn't do a better job in terms of the oversight. We're putting a plan in place to create that trust and to regain that trust, as I said, as a result of the Auditor General's recommendations. But I take responsibility, and I regret that the process that came under my watch didn't meet expectations. It didn't meet my expectations.
Minister, why do you have a different standard of accountability for yourself than you did for a lot of Liberal cabinet ministers? I'll read one quote from me here. There used to be a time when ministers took their integrity seriously. Here's another one back from the mid-2010s. There's never any shame, never any dishonor in doing the right thing. You called on all sorts of Liberal cabinet ministers to resign, and they had not been found wanting in two successive reports from legislative watchdogs. So what makes you so special?
I take the recommendations from both the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner very seriously, and I've been very open with Ontarians today in terms of accepting complete responsibility over the process that took place in the ministry. And I'm committed, as well as our government is committed, to ensuring that we do better moving forward. But as I said in my statement yesterday, the buck stops with me, and I accept and regret that Ontarians have gone through this process.
The buck doesn't stop with anybody because nobody's leaving.
You're saying that you regret it, you're apologizing for it, but you told the Integrity Commissioner that you were not in a very happy mood about how this was going on at the time. So why didn't you do anything? You could have stopped this.
Well, we had, as the Integrity Commissioner acknowledged, the reason for our decision in this regard was, because we were in a middle of a housing supply crisis, and he acknowledges the reasons why we did what we did. It doesn't negate the fact. It doesn't negate the fact that I'm accepting the responsibility as minister that the process that should have been created in our office should ensure public trust and confidence. And clearly, the recommendations from both reports indicate that they do not. So I accept fully the criticism that the Integrity Commissioner has leveled against me. And as a government, we're going to continue to do two things. We're going to obviously continue to move forward because we're still in a housing supply crisis, but we need to ensure that the public trust and confidence is restored. And I know that both the Premier, who you met with this morning, and I both feel the same way, that the government needs to move forward. And I think yesterday's action in regards to one of these properties shows that we're serious about ensuring that happens.
What do you think the consequence should be for you?
Sorry, I didn't hear
What
that.
do you think the consequence should be for you? You've said that the buck stops with you. Nothing seems to have happened, though, other than you now apologizing. What should the consequence be?
Yeah, Ontarians need to have a process that builds public trust and transparency, and the government of Ontario takes both recommendations from both of our independent officers seriously. We are going to implement a better process moving forward, and Ontarians need to know that that's a commitment. I'm here to accept responsibility.
You're going back to the drawing board, Minister. You keep saying that you want to build houses. We've got 2 reports now that's saying that the Greenbelt plan does not lead to houses being built. If you really want to accomplish that goal, why not go back to the beginning and do it right? Do it in a way that you will actually achieve houses in Ontario.
As I responded to you a couple of weeks ago, the process that the government has started to put forward using the nonpartisan Provincial Land and Development Facilitator is a process that will help build upon the recommendations that both the Integrity Commissioner and the Auditor General have put forward. We've already demonstrated with the property yesterday in Ajax that the process using this nonpartisan office is a good one. It identified something a couple of weeks ago that we were able to investigate, and we were able to make a very quick decision to post moving those properties back into the Greenbelt. So the government is committed to ensuring that this is a better process, and we'll continue to work towards that.
Confidence in you again if they're not going to be able to what message does it send to Ontarians if their housing minister isn't going to face any kind of consequences?
Well, I do accept everything that's in those reports. I'm very clear to Ontarians how I feel in terms of what I should have done and what I could have done to create a more transparent process. As I've said, I regret that I didn't, that I should have had a better process. I regret that I relied on my former chief to direct a process that should have been directed more completely by myself. And I say to Ontarians that the process needs to change, and as a government, we're going to make that decision. But I accept responsibility.
Minister, the Integrity Commissioner's report seems to indicate that once you received the mandate letter directing you to look at contractions in the Greenbelt, that you felt a certain discomfort with the idea, because after 4 years of the Premier saying the Greenbelt was never going to be open, now here you were getting completely opposite direction. Why were you so uncomfortable with the Premier's direction?
I received a mandate that was pretty large for Ontarians, and I've acknowledged it for the last year, that building at least 1.5 million homes by 2031 is an order that is very, very difficult to achieve, given the fact that the best year that we've ever had in 30 years was 100,000 starts, and that won't get us in a 10-year period to 1.5 million. So we've done a tremendous amount to get on that goal. But it doesn't change the fact that this process the process that dealt with these 15 properties was not a good process. It needed to be better. The way that the Integrity Commissioners outlined the changes, we as a government, we need to fix this process moving forward. We're committed to do so. But Ontarians need to know that I accept the responsibility, that I didn't have the oversight that we should have had that protected the people's interests.
Minister, if the process was broken, why should Ontarians see the result of the process as legitimate?
Well, I think yesterday the government demonstrated something that I think many of you were very skeptical in November when we posted it, to say that if we didn't have substantial completion on these properties that we would put them back in the Greenbelt. There were a lot of people in this room who were skeptical that the government would do that. And yesterday we demonstrated that we were prepared. We want to send a message to all of those property owners that the government is serious about ensuring that there's a nonpartisan process led by the Provincial Land and Development Facilitator to deal with those properties. We mean what we said in November, but that doesn't negate why I'm here today. I'm here today because the Integrity Commissioner outlined a process that I should have directed that was better in terms of outcomes for Ontarians.
Did you knowingly put your head in the sand?
Again, I've accepted responsibility that I overly relied on my chief to. I am.
Did you knowingly put yourself in the sand, head in the sand, to avoid the political repercussions?
I think the Integrity Commissioner's report covered that the process that was directed from the ministry should have been more directly related to myself, and it shouldn't have been relied on another individual, namely my former chief, in terms of how those properties were dealt with. So I think that.
Checks out with your reputation. You're not seen as an incompetent person, but when you read that report, that's what it looked like. The only way it makes sense to people who know you is that if you thought this was being done because the Premier wanted it, that his people were taking care of it, is that how you saw it at the time?
Yeah, it was, the process around the mandate and the decision around these properties was a big decision by the government. As I said to you all in November, it was a fundamental shift completely from our position in the previous term. The reason was very simple. We were in a severe housing supply crisis, the likes we had never seen in this province. It was getting worse and worse as reports started to stack up. That the problem wasn't just 1.5 million homes, it was at least 1.5 million homes. So the government decided, as I said to you, to make a decision to change course given the severity. The Integrity Commissioner's report that I welcome, it's very clear, the findings, that under my watch there should have been better oversight. There were flaws, there was an over-reliance on one individual. And as I've said to you countless times today, I accept completely the responsibility for that process. It's under my watch. I've said to you yesterday, I said to you today that the buck stops with me, and I've accepted clear responsibility.
Hearing for your resignation at the AMO conference, and the and Indigenous leaders also want you to go. How do you have any credibility left with the people you're supposed to be dealing with?
Well, I had some really good meetings at AMO with our municipal partners, with Six Nations. I've been up north the last 3 days, had a couple of really good announcements with one of our indigenous partners, Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, and the decisions and the announcements that the Premier made and that I made at AMO are extremely important for the government to ensure that we get 1.5 million homes at least built in the next 10 years. So we're going to continue to work with our partners and get advice from them, whether it be our Indigenous partners or whether it be our municipal partners. We've got a Building Faster Fund that's 1.2 million that mirrors the federal Housing Accelerator Fund for Ontario, and we need to make sure this works for municipalities.
You keep saying that the decision was too big, that it was tremendous. Did the Premier set you up to fail with this task?
This is the last question.
The report's pretty clear on where the responsive.
Did the Premier set you up to fail? Was the task too big for you and your office?
The report is very clear that under my watch, I'm answering based on the recommendations of the report. I'm here to answer the recommendations of the report, which clearly says that the process under myself as minister didn't provide the transparency that was required in this regard. And I remain committed. I accept responsibility. As I said at the start of this press conference, I apologize to Ontarians that I did not provide more oversight to my chief of staff, my former chief of staff, and for this process. But I want to, as the government, make sure that the next process has more openness and more transparency.
What exactly were you doing?
Thank you so much.
I thought somebody pulled him. I guess he pulled himself. I just want to say very quickly that today the minister should have resigned. He's very well versed on the principle of ministerial accountability. The Integrity Commissioner said he put his head in the sand. I would say that this minister, with 40 years' experience, knew what he carried to cabinet, knew what he asked his cabinet colleagues to support, and to say here that he needs to fix the process is not accepting responsibility. You say, I accept responsibility, but there's no consequence. I don't believe in the Westminster principle anymore of ministerial accountability. I did for a long time. What he did was wrong. What he did was fail the people of Ontario. He failed this legislature. And he should have stepped down today. You know, they're going to fix the process. I don't know. I want to watch how they're going to put all this toothpaste back in the tube. Because it's all out, and they're not getting it back in. Even if the Premier tries to take his little finger and stuff a little bit back in the top, which he's trying to do. The minister needs to resign. The Premier needs to open the books. The Premier needs to waive cabinet privilege. What's gone on here is wrong. It's $8.3 billion in a cash for your land scheme that Ontarians deserve to know and understand. And if you have any questions, I'll take them.
Have you ever seen in all your years of politics a minister embroiled in such a scandal who did not step down?
I believe that the minister will eventually step down. No, I have never seen this. And the longer that this minister sticks around, the more this sticks to the Premier. The more of the smell of this thing, right? Insider knowledge, deception. It ties, like, when I look at this now, it's evident to me that it looks like all roads lead to the Premier's office. And that's why I'm surprised that the minister hasn't resigned. And the minister's resignation, or the Premier taking him out of cabinet, is just the first step. It's the first thing that needs to happen. There's a lot more. And so that needs to happen, should have happened right now.
What did you think when we were asking about his previous attacks on Liberal ministers and how he was holding them to a higher standard than he appears to be holding himself to?
Well, it's more than just a little bit rich. I mean, he was pretty darn sanctimonious, as I remember him. And that sanctimony has left. You know, he would pop up in the legislature at the drop of a hat, right? Now he's done this thing where he's brought this thing to cabinet that he knew was wrong, that he knew was imperfect, that he was afraid of. I don't know why he stuck his head in the sand. And then he said to his cabinet colleagues, we need to vote for this. How do we have like 28 ostriches up in the cabinet room? Did everybody stick their head in the sand? Did anybody ask any questions? I mean, come on. Come on, man. How can we believe this? It's like nobody asked anything about anything. And when all these meetings between the Premier's office and Cabinet office and the ministry, nobody talked about this stuff.
John, is it normal at Queen's Park for a minister to not know what his chief of staff is doing?
No. I've been around here for a long time. I've worked in a minister's office. I worked with minister's office. I worked in a Premier's office. No. What they're describing happened. It can't happen. It's not believable. It is just not believable. That's not the way that government works. And you can't turn it to incompetence. It's not incompetence. It's either they knew what they were doing wrong or they were being exceptionally negligent. Take your pick. They're both the same.
Is there anything the legislature can do when it reconvenes as far as sanctioning the minister?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing that needs to happen is we asked, that we should bring this before committee. That's happened before. It happened when we had other controversies here. Like I said, gas plants, somebody mentioned this morning. We had a lot of hearings on that. That seemed to be an important thing to do at the time. I think this is equally as important because this is about a handful of people who are well connected, and some who the Premier says are his friends, doing really well, having an $8.3 billion windfall. So when you look at it, the same people who supported Ontario Proud are the same people who the Premier said, I'm going to crack open the Greenbelt. And then he told us all he wasn't going to do that. And then those same people, well, they gave money, and then they helped the Premier raise money. Right? And then they're the same people who had the brown envelopes that Ryan Amato got. And guess what? They're the same people who won that $8.3 billion lottery. Well, in betting terms, that's a pretty tough parlay to thread.
What's your impression on how he evaded a lot of questions there? He didn't answer why he's got a different standard for himself than for Liberal ministers. He didn't answer why he did not provide supervision. What more do you want to know from him?
He can't answer the question because he knows what the real answer to the question is, that he needs to step down as minister because he broke the trust, because he did something in bad faith, because he stuck his head in the sand. You can't answer those questions. You can't say, I take responsibility without taking the consequence for your actions. And the fair and reasonable thing, and part of our democracy, is when a minister fails to this level, that they are no longer a minister. So if any one of you or I or anybody else out there who's got a job failed in the way that this minister failed, you would be out of a job pretty quick. So why are the standards for Minister Clark different than they are for any of us or any other cabinet minister in the past? It's indefensible, totally indefensible.
What if he ends up losing the housing ministry and being shuffled somewhere else?
Not good enough. Not good enough. He failed this legislature, the government, and the people of Ontario when he brought a proposal to cabinet that he knew was wrong. And then he asked his cabinet colleagues to vote for it. I don't know what happened to cabinet, but it sounds like there were a lot of heads in the sand. But he brought it there. And I just repeat again, the longer that this minister is in place, the more that this is going to stick to the Premier.
John, we have 2 reports now that show that government is not working as we thought it should. Not just politically, but from the public service side as well. That there is just a huge mess in terms of how things are getting done. What do you say to Ontarians who are grappling with the fact that their government is not functioning properly at all levels?
The only thing I can say is we're going to keep asking questions and pushing this government so they get it right and they do it the right way. When I read the Integrity Commissioner's report, that's not the way we want the government to work for people. We don't want to actually be talking about this. I don't want to talk about I didn't come here to talk about scandals. I didn't come here to ask ministers to resign. I came here, as many of my colleagues did, to actually just, take care of the things that are important to people. Like make sure my child's school is prepared for him and there's somebody there to help them if they need help. Or like my mom needs help in long-term care. That's our job. Take care of the things that are most important to all Ontarians, the things they depend on. And what we're doing now is we're talking about and spending a lot of time, and we have to do it because we got to get to the bottom of it, about something that's not improving any one of those things. And it's taking away from the government focusing on doing that. And that's a problem. That's wrong. And the first step was for the minister to resign today, for the Premier to open the books, waive cabinet privilege. And I'm going to say this thing, and I've said it last week, I'll repeat it again. Anyone who gets caught up in this, anyone who has to testify, anyone who's part of an investigation, the taxpayer cannot be on the hook for their legal costs. That's a very important principle. And I haven't heard anything from the Premier's office or the government responding. about that. This is not going away. This is going to be around for a long time. It's just the beginning. And what's happening right now is the minister is taking this beginning and stretching it way out. It's not going to go away. We're going to get to the bottom of it. That's the job of not just our party, but all the other opposition parties. And I would argue every member of the PC caucus should be asking the questions that we're asking. Because what happened here was wrong. There's a cover-up. The cover-up started way back when they started talking about this before the last election, doing it under the darkness, the cover of darkness, and then asking public servants, and you touched on this earlier, to sign a non-disclosure agreement that said you can't talk to your boss. That's what the government asked public servants to do. That's fundamentally wrong. They don't work for the political party or the minister or the premier. They work for the people of Ontario. And the Public Service Act clearly defines that. That was the beginning of the cover-up. And now with the minister just saying, I take responsibility and, I take responsibility, no consequence. It's wrong.
John, do you accept his apology though? Do you think that maybe he's genuine and that he feels so much pressure to build housing that he feels genuinely bad?
Minister Clark, I know him well. He's smart. He has 40 years experience. He knew better. He knew what he's doing. Maybe he feels sorry for what he did, but what he did was wrong, and the right thing to do is to resign. Great, thanks.
Contrary to what I just heard the housing minister say, the $8.3 billion Greenbelt scandal is not about building homes. It's never been about housing. It's about a government that is denying ordinary Ontarians access to the homes they need because wealthy, elite insiders came calling. The reason this government is failing to address the housing crisis is because they're more focused on helping a handful of wealthy, well-connected insiders cash in $8.3 billion than they are in actually building homes that people can afford in the communities that they want to live in. And the rest of us are paying the price for that. Our food security, our $50 billion food and farming economy, the wetlands and forests that clean our drinking water and protect us from flooding, all threatened because this government and this minister wants to help 3 or 4 individuals cash in $8.3 billion at our expense. The premier has failed the accountability test. The minister has failed the accountability test. And that is why we are calling for the minister to be removed from cabinet, why we are calling on this government to reverse the corrupt process that led to this Greenbelt scandal and return all Greenbelt lands to full protected status, including the conservation easement on the Dufferin Rouge Agricultural Preserve. And it's also why we're calling for an independent public inquiry, so we can understand how a corrupt process could lead to a handful of individuals cashing in $8.3 billion at our expense, and so we can better understand the public policy implications of this scandal. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mike, do you believe that anything that you saw out of the Integrity Commissioner's report rose to the level of criminality?
Well, we're certainly going to let the RCMP determine that, and that's why I'm encouraging the RCMP to investigate this. I mean, it's clear that the minister broke ethics laws and should be held accountable for that, and the premier has failed to hold him accountable. He's failed to hold himself accountable, and it's clear the buck doesn't stop anywhere in this government.
What did you make of Minister Clark saying repeatedly that he takes full responsibility, but refusing to answer questions about why there has been no consequence for him personally?
How can you take full responsibility for a corrupt process to enable a handful of individuals to cash in $8.3 billion when every expert report including the government's own Housing Affordability Task Force, the Auditor General, professional planners, have clearly stated that none of this Greenbelt land was needed to build homes. As a matter of fact, we already have enough land approved for development to build not 1.5 million, but 2 million homes. So how can the minister say he's accepted any accountability or any responsibility when he refuses to step down after breaking ethics laws?
So what do you see happening when the legislature comes back next month?
Well, we're going to continue to push to hold the government accountable. I'm assuming all the opposition parties will. But I think what conservative MPPs need to ask themselves is what kind of reprimand is going to be demanded by this legislature? What kind of accountability is going to be demanded by this legislature? Clearly, we have a conservative majority government, and they may choose to ignore the Integrity Commissioner's recommendations. I'm asking conservative MPPs to think long and hard about that decision, because the people of Ontario are rightfully outraged. They're going to continue to protest. They're going to continue to rally. Thousands of them are going to continue to put signs on their lawns telling the Premier to keep his Greenbelt promise and not to develop the Greenbelt. That pressure is not going to end. And we're going to ensure that we amplify the voice of thousands and thousands of people across this province who are demanding accountability from this government and who are demanding that protections be returned to Greenbelt lands.
Mike, do you think the task was too big for the minister? Was he set up to fail with the orders that he was given?
The task to build 1.5 million homes isn't too big. As a matter of fact, the Ontario Greens 3 years ago put forward a plan that people have called a masterclass plan in delivering the solutions we need to address the housing crisis. The task that was wrong was being told to come up with a process to break the Premier's repeated promise to maintain protections for the Greenbelt. It's clear now, after a scathing Auditor General's report, a damning Integrity Commissioner's report, that the process that was, quote, designed was completely corrupt. It's led to a handful of wealthy elite insiders cashing in $8.3 billion at our expense. And the Premier, the Minister, the government needs to be held accountable for that.
Do you think the minister is protecting the Premier?
You know, that you'll have to ask the Minister that question. And you didn't get an answer, did you? So, you know what? If you're going to say the buck stops at my desk, if you're going to say I apologize, if you're going to say I'll be held accountable, you need to answer the tough questions that the people of Ontario want answered. The fact that the minister has failed to answer those questions and the Premier's failed to answer those questions shows that both have failed the accountability test.
All right, thanks.
Great, thanks everyone.